All right, so today we're diving deep, really deep into this whole information war thing around the war in Ukraine.
Oh, yeah.
And we've got this fascinating primary source we're looking at,
Okay.
an interview with Sergey Lavrov, the
Hmm.
Russian foreign minister.
Right.
And it's really interesting to hear him lay out Russia's perspective on all this.
Yeah.
But of course, we've got to be super aware of the potential for, well,
Bias.
yeah, bias and spin, right?
For sure.
So we're going to compare his statements with analyses and critiques from some other sources.
Great.
It's going to be pretty eye-opening to see how these narratives get shaped
Absolutely. Yeah.
and how truth can just get, I don't know, tangled up in the fog of war.
Yeah, it's a real mess out there in terms of information.
It's all over.
One thing that really jumps out from this Lavrov interview
Mm-hmm.
is how he uses language to frame the whole situation.
Right.
Like he keeps saying special military operation over and over,
Yeah.
and he just avoids the word war like it's the plague.
Which is, well, I mean, that's a huge red flag right there.
Absolutely.
I mean, one of our other sources actually directly challenges that whole terminology thing.
I was just going to say, it's not just us.
Right.
They really push back on calling it a conflict or an operation
Yeah.
because they say it minimizes what's really happening.
Yeah, they say it has to be called war
Exactly.
because it was unprovoked aggression, plain and simple.
Totally agree.
It's like he's trying to downplay it,
Oh, absolutely.
by using softer language.
It's all about framing,
Right, like Russia's just doing this necessary thing to protect itself or whatever.
protecting Russian speakers, he
Yeah.
says. It's a very specific narrative they're pushing.
And then he spends so much time blaming the West,
Oh, yeah.
especially NATO expansion.
Like it's all NATO's fault.
Right, like Russia's the victim here.
Totally.
I mean, come on, it feels like he's cherry-picking history to fit his story.
He's definitely drawing on that long history of Russian grievances, against the West.
Right.
Framing Russia as this, victim of Western hostility.
It's a powerful narrative.
For sure.
Oh, incredibly powerful.
Especially within Russia.
Yeah, it resonates with a lot of people there.
But one of our sources, they totally push back on this whole civil war idea.
Oh, right, the one that Russia claims to be intervening in?
Yeah, exactly.
They're like, hold on, there were no real separatists in Ukraine before Russia got involved.
Yeah, they're basically saying Russia created them
Like, out of thin air.
to make it look like a civil war.
Right, it's all smoke and mirrors.
So they could swoop in and be the peacekeepers.
Classic tactic.
It's cynical, really.
Totally.
Then there's this whole thing about a neutral Ukraine.
Right, like no NATO membership.
Yeah, Lavrov presents it as, the only way to peace.
The only path to peace, he says.
Right, but another source argues that's basically just a way for Russia to control Ukraine.
Absolutely, it's about limiting Ukraine's choices, denying their self-determination.
Yeah.
Like saying, you can't join that club, you got to do what we say.
Exactly.
There's this one part in the interview that really stuck with me,
Oh, yeah.
where Lavrov says the U.S. might consider a limited nuclear strike.
A nuclear strike.
Yeah, one that wouldn't actually hit the U.S.,
Wow.
but would devastate Europe.
So basically saying the U.S. would be willing to sacrifice their allies.
That's how it came across to me, yeah.
That's pretty intense
I know, right?
and incredibly dangerous rhetoric.
For sure.
It feels like it's meant to drive a wedge between NATO members.
Oh, 100%.
Playing on those anxieties about whether the U.S. would really have Europe's back.
Yeah, like, are they really committed, or are they just going to throw us under the bus?
Right. It's a classic divide and conquer strategy.
Our source actually calls it a dirty trick by Russia,
Yeah, I can see why they'd say that.
trying to weaken Western support for Ukraine.
It's all part of this bigger information war.
It's scary how effective it can be.
Yeah, you start to see how these narratives, even if they're not true, can really influence people.
Totally. It's like Lavrov's story is very carefully crafted.
Oh, yeah. Very calculated.
But when you compare it to other perspectives...
It starts to fall apart.
Exactly.
The facts just don't add up.
One source really goes after Lavrov for how he downplays the civilian casualties.
Right. The human cost of this war.
Yeah, they're like, he's ignoring the devastation, the suffering
And they contrast his statements with all this documented evidence.
of potential war crimes.
Yeah, like Bucha. It's hard to ignore that.
It's like he's trying to erase what happened,
Create this alternate reality.
but the evidence is there.
And when they confront him with it, what does he do?
He just demands more proof.
Right, like he's moving the goalposts.
It's impossible to have a real conversation with someone like that.
Yeah, it's all about obfuscation.
And then when it comes to peace talks,
He's all over the place.
right, one source criticizes him for constantly shifting his demands.
And blaming the West for everything.
It's like he's not actually interested in finding a solution.
It's all just a game.
A very dangerous game.
Absolutely.
It's clear Russia's engaged in this whole sophisticated information war,
Oh, yeah, they're playing the long game.
using all these tactics to shape the narrative.
And it's working.
It's scary how effective it can be.
It really raises the question of how do we even know what's true anymore?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
It's like we're drowning in information, but we're starving for truth.
It's a real dilemma, and it's exactly what we're here to explore.
We got to figure out how to navigate this mess,
Yeah, we'll keep unpacking these different perspectives
digging deeper.
and hopefully help you make sense of it all.
It's going to be a wild ride.
Buckle up,
Yeah, it's a real challenge, you know?
especially with all this information coming at us from all sides.
Oh, totally. It was
Ye-
like drinking from a fire hose.
So where do we even start? How do we untangle this whole web of narratives?
Well, I think the first step is recognizing that everyone has a perspective.
Right, even if they don't come right out and say it.
Exactly like Lavrov. He's the foreign minister.
So obviously he's going to be pushing the Kremlin's line.
Right. Doesn't mean everything he says is a lie.
Of course not.
But we got to view it through that lens.
Like when you're reading a campaign ad,
Exactly.
they're trying to sell you something.
Got to look beyond the surface.
It's not just what they're saying, it's what they're not saying.
Oh, yeah. Like Lavrov barely even mentions the impact on civilians.
Right, the human cost of this war.
One of our sources really goes after him for that.
Yeah, you're like, he's dehumanizing Ukrainians.
By ignoring their suffering.
They make a good point, like, behind every statistic is a real person
Absolutely.
whose life has been shattered by this war.
It really brings home the ethical dimension of this whole information war thing.
It's not just about ideas, it's about people's lives.
Real people are getting hurt.
This one source even goes so far as to call Lavrov an advocate for evil.
Wow, that's pretty strong.
Yeah, they say giving him a platform is irresponsible.
I can see where they're coming from.
It raises some tough questions about journalistic responsibility.
Like, are we giving a platform to harmful views just by talking about them?
Right, is he doing more harm than good?
It's a tough balance, for sure.
On the one hand, we got to be aware of propaganda.
And the potential for giving a voice to really dangerous ideas.
But on the other hand, you don't want to shut down all dialogue,
Right, that just creates echo chambers.
where misinformation can thrive.
It's not about censorship.
It's about engagement,
Responsible engagement.
providing context, challenging falsehoods,
And presenting a range of viewpoints.
so people can make up their own minds.
That's the key, informed decision-making.
One thing that really strikes me is just how massive this whole Russian disinformation campaign is.
Oh, yeah, it's huge.
It's not just a few isolated incidents.
It's a full-on coordinated effort.
To manipulate information and shape global perceptions.
They've weaponized social media.
And online platforms.
It's scary how effective they are.
They've got these whole networks of fake news sites.
And troll farms.
Even state-controlled media.
Pumping out a constant stream of disinformation.
And it's not just aimed at their own people.
They're trying to influence us, too.
Sow discord among allies.
Undermine support for Ukraine.
They're really good at it, too.
Oh, yeah, they're masters at exploiting divisions.
Amplifying fringe voices.
Creating narratives that tap into people's fears and prejudices.
It's like they're playing 4D chess with a global information landscape.
They're always a few steps ahead.
And the stakes are incredibly high.
This is not just some abstract game.
Disinformation can have real-world consequences.
It can shape public opinion,
Influence elections.
even incite violence,
It's a chilling reminder that we're all part of this information war.
whether we like it or not.
Every time we share something online,
We're contributing to the flow of information.
we got to be more mindful of what we're consuming and sharing.
Develop those critical thinking skills.
Be skeptical of our sources.
And watch out for anything that seems designed to trigger a strong emotional response.
Because that's often a sign that someone's trying to manipulate you
Bypass your critical thinking.
and get you to accept their narrative without question.
We all have to be information detectives in the digital age.
I like that, information detectives.
We got to learn to question, analyze, evaluate evidence,
Inform our own informed conclusions.
rather than just blindly accepting what we're told.
But we've talked about bias, disinformation, critical thinking.
It's a lot to take in.
But there's this one theme that keeps coming up in our sources.
What's that?
The power of language.
Oh, yeah. Words matter.
They really do. The words we use, the way we frame things.
The narratives we embrace, they all shape our understanding of the world.
And Lavrov is a master at using language to manipulate perceptions.
Oh, he's a pro.
One source points out how he keeps using terms like conflict and special military operation.
To downplay what's really happening.
They say it's crucial to call it what it is, a war of aggression.
A full-blown invasion.
They also don't like the term separatists.
For the pro-Russian forces in Ukraine.
Right. They point out that Russia basically created those groups.
To make it look like a civil war.
It all ties back to that narrative they're trying to push.
That Russia's just intervening in some internal Ukrainian conflict.
When in reality, they're the aggressors.
It's all about creating a false impression.
To justify their actions.
And it's not just the words themselves, it's how he uses them.
Like he's always talking about historical grievances.
Painting Russia as the victim.
Surrounded by enemies.
Forced to defend itself.
It's a powerful way to appeal to people's emotions.
Fear, resentment, national pride.
It's really effective at rallying support within Russia.
And justifying their actions.
It's crazy how they've convinced so many people that this war is necessary.
It's a reminder that language can be used for good or for evil.
In the wrong hands, it can be a weapon.
A tool for distorting reality.
Spreading falsehoods.
Inciting hatred and violence.
So what does all this mean for us?
As individuals trying to make sense of the world.
In this age of information warfare.
It means we have to be vigilant.
Discerning.
Critical.
We're all targets in this information war.
Our minds are the battleground.
We got to build up our defenses.
Those critical thinking skills.
So we can see through the propaganda and manipulation.
We have to be aware of our own biases.
And how they can be exploited.
We need to be careful about what we consume and share.
And we need to be willing to have open and honest conversations.
Even with people we disagree with.
Because the truth is often messy and complex.
It's rarely black and white.
So let's take a closer look at this one example from Lavrov's interview.
Okay, which one?
Where he claims the U.S. might consider a nuclear strike.
Oh, the one that would supposedly devastate Europe, but not the U.S.
Yeah, that's the one.
It's a classic example of Russian disinformation.
Trying to drive a wedge between the U.S. and its allies.
Like trying to pry apart two boards that are nailed together.
You find the tiniest gap.
And then you hammer in a way.
To break them apart.
That's exactly what Lavrov is doing.
Trying to sow doubt and mistrust.
To weaken Western support for Ukraine.
Our sources say it's a total fabrication.
Designed to create fear and division.
And it's not just about the possibility of a nuclear war.
Which, thankfully, so is very unlikely.
It's about miscalculation and escalation.
One wrong move could have catastrophic consequences.
It's a reminder that we're dealing with incredibly high stakes here.
The risks are very real.
So this seemingly offhand remark about a nuclear strike.
It's not just some random comment.
It reveals a much deeper layer of this information war.
It shows how words can be used to manipulate and deceive.
To create fear and panic.
We have to be so careful about what we believe.
Seek out multiple perspectives.
And don't take anything at face value.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
It's been a whirlwind.
But we're just getting started.
There's so much more to explore.
In the next segment, we'll dive into some specific examples of Russian disinformation.
And we'll talk about strategies for identifying and countering those tactics.
It's going to be eye-opening, so stay tuned. It's like they're building this alternate reality, you know?
Yeah, where everything's justified.
And it's all someone else's fault.
Right, never taking responsibility.
So how do we deal with this?
As individuals, I mean.
How do we not get swept up in all this propaganda?
Well, critical thinking is key.
Okay, but what does that actually look like?
It's about questioning everything.
Everything.
Yeah, being skeptical.
Especially of easy answers.
Exactly. Like if something seems too simple.
There's probably more to this story.
Yeah, you gotta dig deeper.
Look for the motivations, the agendas.
Who benefits from this information?
So it's not about just trusting certain sources blindly.
No, you gotta evaluate the information yourself.
So, like, be our own fact checkers.
Exactly. Think of yourself as an information detective.
Ooh, I like that.
You gather evidence from different sources.
Okay.
Look for inconsistencies.
Contradictions.
Consider the biases.
And then try to piece together the truth.
Based on facts.
That's a good way to think about it.
So what are some clues we can look for?
Yeah, like what are the red flags of disinformation?
Well, one thing is overly emotional language.
Like those clickbait headlines.
Exactly.
Designed to make you angry or scared.
Right. They want you to react emotionally.
Not think critically.
Another thing is the selective use of facts.
Cherry-picking evidence to fit their narrative.
Exactly.
Like Lavrov did with the civilian casualties.
He downplayed the suffering.
And then demanded proof of war crimes.
It's all about creating doubt and confusion.
Making it seem like there's no clear truth.
So how can we become better information detectives?
What are some practical steps we can take?
One thing is to diversify your sources.
Don't just rely on one news outlet.
Right. Get information from a variety of perspectives.
Even ones you disagree with.
Exactly. You got to break out of your echo chamber.
So easy to get stuck in those.
And then you just end up reinforcing your own biases.
Another tip is to be wary of things that seem too good to be true.
Or too outrageous to be believable.
Like if it makes you go, whoa, that's crazy,
Double check it.
before you share it.
Do a quick search.
Check fact-checking websites.
Look for corroborating evidence.
Take a minute to think before you hit that share button,
Because once it's out there, it's hard to take back.
even if it's false.
And remember, it's okay to be skeptical.
To question what you see and hear,
Demand evidence.
especially for extraordinary claims.
Don't be afraid to push back on misinformation either.
Like if a friend shares something questionable,
You can challenge them respectfully,
you might not change their mind
but you might plant a seed of doubt.
and encourage them to be more critical
It's all about having those conversations.
in a constructive way,
The goal is to encourage dialogue and critical thinking.
not to shame or belittle anyone.
Right, it's about working together to find the truth.
So it's a combination of personal responsibility
Being mindful of our own information consumption.
and collective action,
Speaking up against disinformation.
helping others to be more discerning.
It's a team effort
We all have a role to play.
in fighting this information war.
We've covered a lot today.
From Lavrov's narrative to disinformation tactics.
And how to navigate this whole crazy information landscape.
It's been quite a journey
Hopefully you've learned some valuable tools and insights.
to help you make sense of the world.
This war in Ukraine,
It's shown us how important it is to be informed.
and to think critically.
Knowledge is power.
But it's up to us to use that power wisely
Be discerning, be skeptical, be engaged.
and keep fighting for the truth.
Until next time, stay informed and stay curious.